Welcome to Freya's Fairy Tales. We believe fairy tales are both stories we enjoyed as children and something that we can achieve ourselves. Each week, we will talk to authors about their favorite fairy tales when they were kids, and their adventure to holding their very own fairy tale in their hands. At the end of each episode, we will finish off with a fairy tale or short story read as close to the original author's version as possible. I am your host, Freya Victoria. I'm an audiobook narrator that loves reading fairy tales, novels, and bringing stories to life through narration. I am also fascinated by talking to authors and learning about their why and how for creating their stories. We have included all of the links for today's author and our show in the show notes. Be sure to check out our website and sign up for our newsletter for the latest on the podcast. Today is part 1 of 2, where we are talking to Bridget Van der Eyk about her novels. Over the next 2 weeks, you will hear about starting to write just little bits and pieces, taking over a decade to finish your first novel, having people hype up the book before it released, taking inspiration for your characters from friends in real life, stepping out of your bubble to promote your book, accepting criticism even though you're terrified, getting help to make sure your locations are accurate, and hiring out the things you need help with. 10 Dates. The Hollywood Socialite, Book 1. How far is Libby willing to go to keep her dirty, little Victoria's secret? Libby Evans is a Hollywood socialite and heiress to her great-grandfather's film production empire, Privileged Pictures. She and her friends are part of the new Hollywood Brat Pack. Anita Yates is a former child star. Willa Nelson is an aspiring model. And Charlie Niven is a hotel heiress and aspiring fashion designer. At 22, Libby has all the money in the world, a gorgeous oil-heir boyfriend, and with a Victoria's Secret angel contract just within her grasp, her life is perfect. Unfortunately, Libby's life takes a wrong turn when she has a little too much to drink at another swanky Hollywood party. So what happens when Little Miss Perfect wakes up with a pounding hangover and a naked paparazzo, Wentworth Turner, in bed with her? Sounds like a Hollywood scandal if it ever leaks. Libby is desperate to keep the secret away from the tabloids, for the sake of her career and her relationship. It turns out that Wentworth wants just one thing in exchange for his silence: 10 dates. So the show is Freya's Fairy Tales, and that is fairy tales in 2 ways. Fairy tales are something that we either watched or read or had read to us as kids. It is also the journey for you to spend weeks, months, years working on your book to hold that in your hands as a fairy tale for you. So I like to start off with, what was your favorite fairy tale when you were a kid, and did that favorite change as you got older?
My favorite fairy tale when I was a kid was definitely The Little Mermaid, and I feel like
Okay.
it's continued to stay the favorite throughout my life, and I am so excited to see the new one. I haven't seen it yet, but it's on my list of things to do.
Now, the new one, did they simultaneously release that one on digital, or is it just in theaters right now?
I think it's just in theaters right now, and with a newborn, it's a little bit hard to kind of get the couple of hours I need to go to the theaters and things like that. So I'll just wait. I'll wait for a little bit and try and see it as soon as I can.
So, at what age did you kind of start writing anything, short stories, whatever it was?
I think I can remember in like grade 5 or 6. So I was about 10 or 11 when I started writing just little bits and pieces, and they weren't anything fantastic or anything like that. But they were just little stories that I started writing. And it wasn't until I think I was like fresh out of high school, it was like 18, 19, where I actually sat down and decided, oh, I should actually, write something that I'm interested in. At the time, that was romance and things like that. So, yeah, it wasn't until I was probably like 18 or 19 when I started writing romance. But yeah, I've been writing lots of little bits and pieces since I was about 10.
So, was it like complete stories or just like parts of stories?
It was a lot of parts of stories. stories. I think I had probably 1 or 2 full stories, but I mean, when I was 10 or 11, that was probably like, max like 1,000 or 2,000
Yeah.
words, that kind of thing. But yeah, lots of and I still have them on my laptop when like all through high school, where it was just like little bits and pieces that never really got finished. But the
Mm.
ideas were there, and jotted them down and things like that. But yeah, nothing that ever really got properly finished.
So now I saw you have 2 books released technically, but one of them's like a Halloween version of the other
Yes.
book, or do you have like other ones under a different name too?
No, no. So 10 Dates was my debut that I released last July. And then I thought I'd do something a little bit fun and do a Halloween version of that. So there's a
Mhm.
chapter in 10 Dates where the female and the male main characters go to a costume party. And so I kind of took that, rewrote the point of view for that and added it as a bonus chapter, and decided
Mm.
to like do like a whole Halloween type issue. We don't celebrate Halloween here in Australia, but I've always really loved Halloween, and I know it's really,
Mhm.
really big in the States.
Yeah. A little bit.
Yeah.
So how long did it when did you start writing 10 Dates, and how long did it take you to get your first draft done?
So I started writing, like I said, fresh out of high school. So I was about 18 years old. And I wrote 5 chapters and then didn't touch it again until I was on maternity leave with my daughter. And that was over a
Okay.
decade later.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, so I had so in Australia we've got amazing maternity leave. So I had 13 months of maternity leave with my daughter. And I wrote 20 of the 26 chapters while I was on maternity leave, and finally finished, what was that, 2021? So I was well into my 30s by then. So it didn't take me that long to write it, but it just kind of, the idea got jotted down. I started it and it just kind of got left until I had the time and I guess the dedication to be like, you know what? No, I'm going to actually finish
Mhm.
this. But that's the thing. I've spoken to so many independently published authors that are just like, yeah, I started something, but it never really got finished. And I think
Mhm.
it's a big commitment to kind of sit down and be like, yes, okay, so this needs to get done, especially that first draft, which is
Right.
sometimes so hard to get all
Yeah.
the way through. So yeah, it was over a decade before I kind of looked at that again.
So 10 years technically, but not 10
Yeah,
years of just straight writing.
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So you typed the end or however you signed off your book, and what did you do kind of next to get it ready to go live?
Um, I think at the time I was still quite a newbie to the publishing world. So
Mhm.
at the time I thought the only way was to get it traditionally published. So I queried a whole bunch of literary agents, a whole bunch of traditional publishing houses and things like that, for probably about over a year. And
Okay.
nothing really happened. I thought that I'd try and use social media to kind of build a bit of a following and things like that. And that's when I was kind of introduced to this world of independent publishing.
Mm.
And I wasn't actually aware that that was even a thing, or that it was as easy as it ended up being to
Mhm.
actually publish. I mean, obviously the editing and putting the book together, that's the hard part. But the actual
Mhm.
publishing on Amazon, so it's a platform I'm using, it was quite straightforward. And I spoke to an indie author that I had been talking to, and asking questions and things, um, while I was going through this journey. And she said that the reason she independently published was that she wanted to retain full creative control of what the final
Mhm.
product looked like.
Yeah.
And I never really looked at it like that. But then when I was putting it all together, I was like, that actually sounds so appealing. Like the idea of someone coming in and changing the story, or, it coming out with a cover that I wasn't 100% happy with,
Mhm.
kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? I reckon I can do this myself. And then the product that I have at the end, I know that I'll be 100% happy with, and that
Right.
that's what I want it to look like. Yeah.
So were you querying with the first draft, or had you done some editing on it before you did that?
Unfortunately, I queried with the first draft, and when I look back at it, it's the first draft's always really, really rough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I probably should have refined it a little bit. I was such a newbie to everything, and I was like, "Cool, I've
Right.
got this first draft. I should just get it out because it takes forever." Like traditionally publishing takes so long to
Yes.
even get anyone, and the wait times between, you can expect to hear from us in, 6 to 12 months. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like we've got massive wait times and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the first draft was really, really rough. So I'm not really surprised that I didn't hear back positively from anybody.
So I'm currently working, me and my husband are both working on our first novels. And I'm like, I don't even nah, he can do whatever he wants to. And I tell him that all the time. I'm like, you're welcome to
Yeah.
go through the querying process if you want to. I'm like, I don't want to spend all that time. And also, I don't think I could handle all the rejection. So
Yeah.
I'm like, no thanks. But also, like, the control. And I'm like, I don't have any idea. Like, there are certain, word count expectations for different genres or
Yeah,
whatever.
sure.
And I'm like, I don't want to have to worry about that. Like, if I think that, like, if my fantasy book is going to be 200,000 words, it's going to be 200,000 words. And
That's
who
exactly it,
cares?
isn't it? Yeah.
You'll find your readers, like, some people aren't gonna pick it up because it's too big, and some people will be like, "Well, the other one that I read was 400,000 words." Like
Yeah. Yeah, it's so nice to just when you independently publish to just be able to put out something that exactly the way that you want it to be.
Mhm. And you'll find, assuming you put out you're not putting your first draft out into the world for people,
Yep.
you will assuming you don't write the worst book in the entire world, you will
Yep.
find readers who want to read and love your stories. So it's, not everybody loves every genre or every storyline or every trope or whatever the case may be, but you'll find your people.
That's right, yeah, and
So
social media is so good for that.
yeah. So you said last year you published, and what did you, once you got it up and ready and available for people to buy, what did you do to promote it in the first early days?
So before I even published it, I just reached out to people personally on Instagram that I had connected with in the Bookstagram community.
Mhm.
So I think the first feedback that I actually got on the manuscript was I think January of the year that I actually published. So I was getting people to kind of try and hype up the book before it was actually published in July.
Okay.
And then it's just been nonstop, trying to get, I guess, more visibility on the actual book and to make people
Mhm.
aware that it's actually there. So reaching out to people, providing, complimentary copies that they're willing to read and review and things like that. That's
Mhm.
really what I've been mainly doing. Reaching out to people that are happy to hype up the book and things like that. And the feedback has been really, really positive. Obviously, I haven't sold a million copies, but as an indie author, I feel like that's would be one in a million. It'd be amazing to do, but I'm just happy for the number of people all over the world that I've been able to talk to that have said, really, really enjoyed your book and things like that.
Mhm.
And that to me is, success in itself. I'm really, really
Right.
happy with that. And yeah, it's just an ongoing thing being an indie author. And I think that's probably a misconception a lot of people don't have, where I don't have a big marketing team behind me. Any kind of
Mhm.
promotion I want to do, it's got to be me pushing it. It's got to be me reaching out and making those contacts and connections. So it's
Mhm.
yeah, it's nonstop. But then at the same time, you got to think about, cool, now I've got this first book out, got to get the next one out so I'll
Yeah.
seem more accessible as an author and things like that. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It keeps going and going and going, never stops.
Right. I feel like you go through a little bit of the same thing with narrating. There's a little bit of like when I started, I didn't do like any coaching or anything like that. I just like jumped in. I do not recommend, and I tell people this anytime they ask, "Well, how did you get started?" I'm like, I don't recommend my way to
Yeah.
anybody. I'm like, it was a terrible way to get started. I quite literally was scrolling through TikTok and was like, we're gonna look and see if we can find any like work from home stuff that I can do like on the side. And so I like,
Yeah.
search TikTok work from home jobs. I'm like, may as well. And so I do that, come across very clickbaity, make $1,000 an hour narrating audiobooks. And this was in like August of 2021. And so I come
Yep.
across this and I'm like, okay, well, that sounds very clickbaity. Like every other work from home ad sounds
Yep.
clickbaity. So I'm like, we're going to search for actual audiobook narrators now. Search audiobook narrator. Sure enough, here's a couple different narrators who had just done like, here's how to get started
Yeah,
videos.
sure. Mhm.
And so, it's not $1,000 an hour unless you're some big, huge, famous person already that
Wouldn't that be great
I
though?
know, I know, but I'm like, everybody would be doing it clearly if
Yeah.
everybody was making that. So I, searched that and like literally this was in August. By September, I had my booth set up. I had my microphone already. I had my computer software like set up and good to go. So I'm like, when I'm like, I jumped in with 2 feet. I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
need training or anything. I'm just going to jump in and start auditioning. And very, very quickly, I started landing books. At the beginning, it was all these like really low paid, like nonfiction books.
Yep.
But I
Mhm.
was like, hey, if I'm landing the jobs and I stayed booked up the whole time, I'm like, if I'm landing these jobs, I'm going to take all the money I make and immediately upgrade my equipment and all of
Yeah, of
that.
course. Mhm.
And so that's what I did for the first little while. I took every single cent that I made. I made like $1,200 in the first like 2 or 3 months. And I took that and I completely upgraded my equipment. And then I started doing more like royalty share and fiction and still had no idea what I was doing narrating
Yeah.
wise. I'm like, I've learned how to produce a book and get it up to spec so that it gets through quality, but I'm like, I sound awful still. So it wasn't until like early last year, I started a fiction podcast in October. So September I start narrating, October I start a daily fiction podcast, like classic novel audiobooks.
Yep.
And then like right after that in like January is when I landed my first fiction royalty share paid, I'm getting paid essentially to produce and narrate this book. And I'm like, yeah. So January I started that and I'm like, I listened through audiobooks and I'm like, really? I got good in like July? So I'm like, it
Yeah.
was, almost a full year after I had started. I'm like, okay, now I sound like a narrator. And I look at reviews and I'll get reviews on like first books that I did. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
of course.
they're like bad reviews. They're like, the narrator was awful. And I'm like, fair, fair. And
Yeah.
now I get reviews on like books I do now. And they're like, oh my God. In fact, I just got a comment from a listener yesterday and she's like, "You are the voice of Sophie. You nail the character perfectly." And I'm like,
Oh, that's
"Yes,
fantastic.
I've made it."
Yeah.
So I'm like hoping that with writing that like when I release this first book that I get on the good side and I don't have to deal with the negative at all. But like with you, I've been writing somewhat since I was a kid.
Yep.
So it's like, hopefully, but I also know as I've talked to many authors, this podcast has been going for over a year now.
Yeah.
Talked to
Yeah.
many authors who are all like, do not publish your first draft. So
Yeah, no, don't show anyone your first draft.
I did show a couple of authors that I've narrated for, like just the first chapter before I had done any editing on it
Yep.
at all.
Mhm.
And, like, the only feedback was, like, I had some really long sentences, like
Oh,
40
I do that
plus
too.
words,
Yes, I
and then
do
these,
that too.
like, no paragraphs, it was all just, like, giant chunks of text, and one of the authors was like, "This reads really difficultly because it's not, like, broken up," and then I, like, pop it into an editing software, and it's like, "Do you know you have 40 plus word sentences?" And I'm like, "No, I wasn't
No.
counting." Like I put commas in there, like
No, that's what I do too. It's like comma, 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 and I'm like, "Wow,
yeah.
this is a really long sentence." But
Well,
that's my thing too.
like, I remember from school, though, it was like, if it was all one thought, it should be one sentence, like, I
Mm.
think I remember that from school, so, like, I felt like it was all one thought, but then I'm, like, reading through, and I'm like, "Okay, really, we could break this up into"
Yeah, to a couple. Yeah, sure.
yeah, 3, 4, 5 sentences. So you got it out there. You have now. How many other podcasts have you done? Because you reached out to me, obviously.
I think it's been a handful of them. I think we'd be closing in on somewhere between 5 to 10. So I just like reaching out to people. Most of the podcasts are US ones. So it's always really
Mm-hmm.
fun to talk to people from the US. I haven't been on any Australian ones, but I haven't really found many book podcasts that are Australian based. So yeah, most of them I do. I talk to people from the US, and it's just really nice to connect with people that love books and other authors and things like that from different parts of the world. So
Mhm.
yeah.
I think A.K. Mulford just moved to Australia. I think she has a podcast
Oh,
that I
okay.
would assume is book related since she's an
Yep.
author. She's the one that I had to redo the interview with because it didn't
Oh, there
record.
we go.
Yeah, she was in
Sure.
New Zealand at the time. It was, like, right before she moved. So,
Yep.
like, she was still in New Zealand, but in the midst of packing and all of that stuff.
Ah, okay.
So, where now, this was, more than 10 years ago at this time, but where did the idea for the book come from?
Um, so the characters I created for 10 Dates really drove the story and really inspired what the story ended up becoming. So Libby Wentworth, the Brat Pack, every character in there was inspired by somebody from my real life. Most
Okay.
of them people I went to high school with. So
Mhm.
I went to an all girls private high school. So there were
Okay.
plenty of interesting characters that I went to high school with that I drew on to create these characters. So obviously, I had to embellish a lot. I wasn't a Hollywood socialite and I didn't have a big fabulous life, but
You mean you
the
were not Serena in whatever the name of the show
Gossip
name
Girl,
just like
yeah.
yeah, I was like, the name of the show just, like, went boop.
But that was another big inspiration that I had because when I started developing these characters, this was circa 2007, and the Gossip Girl TV series was my jam. That
Mhm.
was what I lived my life for. Um, but I thought, I'd do something a bit different. Didn't want to do the whole New York socialite scene, so I thought
Mhm.
let's make it Hollywood where things are fabulous, things are out of this world, crazy. Nobody lives their life like that, but
Mhm.
we it's entertaining, and that's what I hoped for with the book, that people would at least be entertained by it. But yeah, that's kind of where it originated from. It was really the characters that kind of drove the story, and I'm a big romance novel buff, so it made sense that the end product ended up being a love story of sorts.
Right, right. So what is you said you are now working on the second book. Is this a
Yep.
series or is it a totally different thing going on with this second book you're working on?
So the second book it's going to be part of a series. I'm planning one more book after this sequel that I'm writing.
Mhm.
So it'll be a three-part romance series, and essentially we are following the life of the Hollywood socialite, the female main character, Libby Evans. So in 10 Dates, we're following her story and we continue that into the sequel,
Okay.
which I'm hoping to have out by the end of the year. But we're in editing at this point, and editing does take forever. If you want to get it done properly and you want,
Right.
I'm a perfectionist, so I want the final product to be absolutely perfect. I don't want anyone to post on my Goodreads, "Oh, the grammar was awful in this. The spelling was terrible." It's like my worst nightmare. So I
Yeah.
want to have everything perfect, which is why tentatively end of the year, but we'll
Mhm.
have to see how much time I can dedicate to it with a toddler and a newborn. So we're a bit
Now
pressed for time in this house, but
right.
we're going to try our hardest.
Now realistically, even trad pub books have issues.
Yep,
So
that's exactly right.
I feel like you have to settle on, like, a happy medium, like, it's as good as I think it's going to possibly get, but because you
That's right.
are self-publishing, you can go in and fix things if people point them out later.
That's right. Yes, that is true. It's just the perfectionist in me where, I want everything
Yeah.
to be absolutely perfect, and sometimes that is completely unrealistic, but we're going to strive for it anyway.
My perfectionist side is like, "Well, it was perfect the first time."
Yeah, that's
So
true. That's a good way
so
to look at it.
but then you have 40 plus word sentences, so clearly there's an issue somewhere.
Yeah, that's true.
So how did you have your cover made? Did you do that or
Um So I love to draw. I am rubbish at it though. So I did reach out to a couple of different illustrators on Instagram
Mhm.
to try and bring the characters to life. I knew exactly how I wanted the cover to look.
Mhm.
So it was, I guess, trying to find someone that could bring my image in my head and my awful, awful descriptions that I gave them to life. So yeah, I worked with her name is Keeks. She's got an Instagram. She did the cover for me,
Mhm.
and I've had some really, really great feedback on it. Really, really liked the idea though. As time went on and I started reading more contemporary romance, so you know your Ali Hazelwoods, your Baileys, and things like that, I really started to fall in love with the animated characters that people are
Mhm.
illustrating and having on the cover of their books. So while I did love the original cover, I thought maybe we'll try something different just to kind of see, like I was saying, being an indie author, it's non-stop marketing, trying to make your book more appealing to people and things like that. So I was like, cool, if maybe we try a different kind of cover that kind of fits in with what contemporary romance covers kind of look like now, we
Mhm.
might, you know, grab some more readers and things like that. So I've got a new cover coming out on July 1st. So that'll be the 1 year anniversary of
Okay.
10 Dates being published. And that one's really drawing on the animated, illustrated covers and kind of just taking what Libby and Wentworth look like and going from that original cover of them being the back view to seeing what their faces would look like and things like that. So I've been
Mhm.
working with another illustrator on Instagram for that. But it was really nice to be able to support some of the, I guess, lesser well known illustrators who are trying to, you know,
Mhm.
get their work out and things like that.
Right.
So that's been really nice. But yeah, I designed the cover entirely for both of them. But it's just, yeah, I needed that illustrator to be able to draw for me because, yeah, if I had tried to do it, it would have been terrible.
Yeah, I need to do a video of the transition from not this podcast. I made this podcast's cover art in Canva.
Yep.
Um, but my daily fiction podcast, I had same as you, picture in my head of like what I wanted it to look like.
Yep.
And so I my husband is an artist. I am
Oh,
not.
nice.
I am not at
Yep.
all. But I drew for him stick figures
Ah,
of
lovely.
what I'm like, this is what I'm thinking. And then he like made it look good. And then we
Oh,
paid
that's
someone
amazing.
because he hand draws. So he hand
Yep.
drew it and then I like digitized it on an iPad. And that's what we ran with for the first 8 months, I think. And then we
Okay.
paid someone like on Fiverr to take it and like professionalize it. So it
Ah,
looks
sure.
same logo, looks way different than my original drawing, but took the same exact logo that my husband had done and just like made it more polished looking, less hand
Yep.
drawn looking. I need to do it like a transition video where you see like here's the original all the way up to what it is now.
I'd love to see that.
It's not good. I have it saved because I drew it on my iPad, so, like, I still
Yep.
have the screenshot of the awful drawing that I did, but, yeah, I should do that. People be like, "Oh, dear God."
Ah, that's amazing though. See, I didn't do any of that. Mine was just using a whole bunch of words and being like, "Cool, can you put like the female character like this?" And I kind of wanted to look like this. Here's an inspiration picture, and here's another inspiration picture.
Yeah,
It was
inspiration
a
ones are good too.
mess. It was a mess, and I have no idea how my two illustrators came up with the amazing things they did. But I was like, oh, you know, kind of like this, but kind of like that, and here, like this photo here that I found on the internet, and this one, and this, and this. It was a mess, but they did such an amazing job.
When we were designing the booth that I'm in now, I had in my head so originally I worked out of my closet. I've only been in this booth since this week. But well, I talked to you because I had to like reschedule to get this booth set up. But for like the designing it, originally I was like, oh, like in my head, I was like, oh, it'll be fine. Well, for like a year and a half, I was like, we'll just build a new booth whenever we move in like 5 years. And then I'm like, screw this. I can't stand up in my recording booth. It's driving me crazy and it's hot.
Yeah,
So
sure.
so in my head, I'm like planning out like where the door is going to be and like the size that I want it to be. I'm like, taking out a tape measure and measuring the room to see like what
Yep.
size would fit and like all these things. And then my husband's like, "Oh yeah, we should have my engineer father help us design it." And I'm like, "That's cool. You and your dad can design this thing, whatever, whatever." We get there, we visit them like twice a year. They live like 9 hours from us. And we're at their house and he's like, father-in-law pulls out his laptop and he starts designing it. My husband's kind of staring at him, making no comments whatsoever. And I'm like, "Hey, I want to watch this. I've never seen someone design something that's cool." And then he
Yep.
starts to do stuff and I'm like, "Why are you doing it like that?" Well, I didn't think about a large part of the issue was they had been at our house a few months prior and I had completely rearranged everything in my office
Oh,
since they'd
sure.
been here. So he's designing it thinking it still looks like it did. And I'm like,
Yep.
"No, no, no, the door can't be there because there's something in the way." So
Yeah, of
like,
course.
the door has to be here, and then he's like trying to make it open one way, and I'm like, "It can't open that way. It's not gonna work. I'm not gonna be able to get in there." So it's like this whole thing of like, I should have drawn it on a piece of paper and been like,
Yeah.
"Here's what's in my head." And now it works great. It's up, it's good.
It looks
We're good.
amazing.
It's me and my daughter she became a pro at putting the little Velcro. We used like Velcro squares to hold
Yep.
all the little foam things up. And she was
Oh,
a
okay.
pro at I cut them, she stuck them, and then I put them on the
Ah,
wall where they needed to be. She's 8.
teamwork.
She's
Oh, that's
8,
gorgeous.
so she tried to help cutting the Velcro, but the sticky stuff on it kept making the scissors sticky,
Oh,
so,
yeah.
like yeah. And then I had to do all the lights have these, like, sticky hooks that hook them on the wall, and getting
Yep.
the backing off the sticky was a nightmare, so I had to do all that, but yeah,
It looks
teamwork,
amazing, though. It looks really
teamwork.
good.
Oh, it's so nice, and, like, I have an air conditioner at my feet that I can, like, turn on between chapters while I'm narrating now.
Oh,
So I
that's
have,
nice.
like whereas, like, before it'd be like, "Open the closet door and hope the air wafts in."
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, because you
so
guys are starting to get warm there now.
it is I don't know what it is today, 70, 80 outside,
Yep.
but similar, humidity is insane here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Texas, it's not comfortable.
No, I can't
It's
imagine it would
hot.
be. Yeah.
So, it's like you just deal with it, but also I was like, I would like some kind of air coming into my booth, even if it's I could have paid like 3 times the price and had a silent air conditioner,
Yeah, I was gonna say because yeah, the air conditioner
but
would definitely be loud.
yeah, but it was like the silent unit was like 3 times the price, then we would have to, like,
Yeah.
pay someone to put it in, and I'm like, I would rather just have something that is a third of the cost. I can install it literally myself if
Yep.
need be. I have a husband who does help with things, though, so he did it. Um, so I'm not allowed to touch tools because on Monday, I bruised the bone on my finger with a
Oh.
screwdriver. So I was trying to be an adult and remove all the staples from the walls in the closet I was in, and now
Oh,
I'm
sure.
not allowed to touch tools because I bruised my bone. So
No, my husband's a bit like that with the tools too. He doesn't really like me touching them either.
he's just like, "How do you how?" And I'm like, "I don't know." Like,
He's trying to be
clearly
helpful.
clearly that was not the aim, but we'll just let the next owners deal with it now because 'cause I'm not
Yeah.
allowed to touch the tools. Bridget liked The Little Mermaid growing up, and still today. The Little Mermaid, also known in English as The Little Sea Maid, is a literary fairy tale written by the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, first published in 1837 as part of a collection of fairy tales for children. Hans Christian Andersen was a Danish author. Although a prolific writer of plays, travelogues, novels, and poems, he's best remembered for his literary fairy tales. Andersen's fairy tales, consisting of 156 stories across 9 volumes, have been translated into more than 125 languages. They have become culturally embedded in the West's collective consciousness, readily accessible to children, but presenting lessons of virtue and resilience in the face of adversity for mature readers as well. His most famous fairy tales include The Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Mermaid, The Nightingale, The Steadfast Tin Soldier, The Red Shoes, The Princess and the Pea, The Snow Queen, The Ugly Duckling, The Little Match Girl, and Thumbelina. His stories have inspired ballets, plays, and animated and live-action films. Today we'll be reading The Real Princess by Hans Christian Andersen. Don't forget we're reading Les Morts d'Arthur, the story of King Arthur and of his noble knights of the Round Table on our Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. The Real Princess. There was once a prince who wished to marry a princess, but then she must be a real princess. He traveled all over the world in hopes of finding such a lady, but there was always something wrong. Princesses he found in plenty, but whether they were real princesses, it was impossible for him to decide. For now one thing, now another seemed to him not quite right about the ladies. At last he returned to his palace quite cast down, because he wished so much to have a real princess for his wife. One evening a fearful tempest arose. It thundered and lightened, and the rain poured down from the sky in torrents. Besides, it was as dark as pitch. All at once there was heard a violent knocking at the door, and the old king, the prince's father, went out himself to open it. It was a princess who was standing outside the door. What with the rain and the wind, she was in a sad condition. The water trickled down from her hair, and her clothes clung to her body. She said she was a real princess. "Ah, we shall soon see that," thought the old queen mother. However, she said not a word of what she was going to do, but went quietly into the bedroom, took all the bedclothes off the bed, and put 3 little peas on the bedstead. She then laid 20 mattresses, one upon another, over the 3 peas, and put 20 feather beds over the mattresses. Upon this bed, the princess was to pass the night. The next morning she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly indeed," she replied. "I've scarcely closed my eyes the whole night through. I do not know what was in my bed, but I had something hard under me, and am all over black and blue. It has hurt me so much." Now it was plain that the lady must be a real princess, since she had been able to feel the 3 little peas through the 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. None but a real princess could have had such a delicate sense of feeling. The prince accordingly made her his wife, being now convinced that he had found a real princess. The 3 peas were, however, put into the cabinet of curiosities, where they are still to be seen, provided they are not lost. Wasn't this a lady of real delicacy? Thank you for joining Freya's Fairy Tales. Be sure to come back next week for the conclusion of Bridget's journey to holding her own fairy tale in her hands, and to hear another of her favorite fairy tales.